Tonight, and for that matter tomorrow, is a very significant day in the Chabad world. Let me tell you why. Well, like by extension, the Jewish world, as you will hear. On this day, 91 years ago, that would be 1927. So the previous Rebbe, that's our Rebbe's father-in-law, our Rebbe is the 7th, I speak of the 6th Rebbe. So he had been arrested by the Soviet authorities. The door is open. What's coming on? Just press number 6 and tell him the door is open. There's no telephone. Anyway, so he had been arrested by the Soviet authorities. He was the number one enemy of state. And what was the crime of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph I? Here's a picture of him here. His crime was that he was a counter-revolutionary of the most severe order. The communists were determined to stamp out any vestige of religion and faith in God, especially Judaism, all religions. And the previous Rebbe had an underground army of Hasidim that he inspired and funded, who kept Judaism alive at the risk of their lives under the Soviet boot. In fact, several of them, a good number of them, were arrested and executed. Many others were banished to Siberia, some for as long as 25 years. And finally, things caught up with the Rebbe himself, and a web of had been spun, and they had enough evidence to have him eliminated. And he was arrested late at night after an exhausting day of seeing people and guiding and blessing. And he was sentenced to death, to be shot before the firing squad. Miraculously, there was a world outcry, tremendous pressure. But the truth is, the Soviet authorities knew that one Jew more or less wouldn't make much of a difference, and public outcry would very quickly abate. The fact that they had first commuted to 10 years exile and then 3 years kind of a house arrest. And then it turns out as follows. Just tell you briefly the story because it's very relevant. Number one, the previous Rebbe is arrested for what we're doing now. We are studying Torah. We're learning about how to pray. He was, especially for children, the cheders, the chadorim, that's what he dedicated his life to. And what was most difficult for him was not his own peril, but the fact that he lost Hasidim before the firing squad or in the gulags, but continued nonetheless. The Hasidim had a song then, which we sing on occasion. It's Russian, I don't know the words, just a few of them. It was composed by a fellow called Ben Zion Shem Tov. If anybody knows, he's Basi Treitel's grandfather. He was one of 10 Hasidim that previous Rebbe had called in private audience into his office during those days and made a pact with them, a covenant in blood, metaphorically, a krisus bris, that they would give up to the last drop of blood, them and their families, for the survival of Yiddishkeit in Russia. He was one of them. Most didn't survive, he did. And he had a song that they would sing. It's called We're the Rebbe's Soldiers. The Rebbe's Army, Mi Armiya Admur. We're soldiers in the Rebbe's army. And one of the lines there reads, when one of us falls, there are many ready there to take his place, which is what happened. I should add, mind you, that we are witness to that in our own times, tragically. Not quite the same circumstances, but after the Holzbergs were murdered in Mumbai, there was a lineup, as it were, of young couples ready to go to Mumbai and take over the Chabad house. There is a young couple there today and doing valiantly and wonderfully. So the previous Rebbe's whole self-sacrifice and the Hasidim, men and women, was all about this. The privilege to be able to pray unhindered. The Soviets allowed personal prayer in theory. They forbade public gatherings or promoting Judaism. That was only in theory, but even in practice, even personal observance was a risk. You had to show up to work on Shabbos and send your children to school on Saturday. So here we are, learning about this on this very special day. And one more thing that is so connected to us here now. Just a little bit of the story. So it was on Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, the first day of Tammuz, 1927, they came into his cell and they told him to stand up. They're going to tell him, come with us into the office. And there he was going to be told that he was going to be at that point 3 years house arrest in Kostroma, somewhere in eastern Russia. Just to tell you, he refused to stand. He treated them like naught and nothingness. Did not cooperate. He spoke only in Yiddish, even though he spoke a perfect Russian, because they understood Yiddish. Tragically, his interrogators and arresters were Jews, the most fanatical, sad part of our history, sad chapter, but most fanatical pursuers, that's not the term, Ricky, where are you? People that persecutors of Judaism were Jews. They were highly committed, deeply committed communists, and in fact there was a Jewish communist party called the Efsektia, which simply means the Jewish section. The previous had indicated to them that they were making a terrible mistake on a personal level. It wouldn't. Stalin turned on them and purged the communist party of the Jewish section. They were all eliminated. That was later. But this is now 1927. So they're coming to tell him, stand up. He refuses. They beat him. They come back again, stand up, refuses. They beat him. Then the third time they stop to stand up. Please come with us. And so that's when he comes into the office and he sees his file on the table. And it says there, execution by firing squad, and there's a big niet, no, 10 years, no, 3 years. That's what things were at that point. 3 years, kind of a house arrest. So, you're leaving today. This is Thursday. He says, when do I arrive? In Kostroma, they said on Saturday. He says, I'm not going. And didn't. Remained in the lion's den, quite literally, until Sunday. Now the Rebbe once addressed this. How was he able to do this? Halachically, by Jewish law, his life was in danger. This could change in a moment. He could disappear and nobody would know. How is he allowed to stay a millisecond in the claws of the communists? Arriving on Shabbos, not only you're allowed to, you must. And he's not driving the train either, The Rebbe said once he didn't because the Rebbe was the inspiration to the underground Hasidim. If they had heard that he compromised, even though they knew it would be halachically not just sanctioned but encouraged, but still the Rebbe compromised, and that might and would have probably in some way diminished their own degree of devotion and sacrifice, so he wouldn't do it. So the end was he leaves on Sunday. And here's the point I'm getting to. He was allowed to take one person with him, anybody, one person to accompany him. He chose his middle daughter, our Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke. No Chassid, not his wife, not the older daughter, the younger, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke. And she was with him, went with him to Kostroma. The story goes, they arrived 3 days later, 3-day trip. On the 12th of Tammuz, which is today, his birthday, 12th of Tammuz, he had to report every day to the NKVD office. And he comes and they tell him, they got word from Moscow, free. That day was a public holiday in Russia, so things were closed. They said, tomorrow, the 13th of Tammuz, which is actually tomorrow, you will actually be liberated, which he was, which was a stupendous miracle. The Rebbe continued, even in prison, to oversee and inspire and expand his activities whilst even in Soviet Russia. And certainly did so when he was in Kostroma. Despite all of that, they allowed him his freedom. It's one of the great, astonishing miracles of our day, including the fact that all those that worked on his behalf, lobbying in Soviet Russia, identifying with him, also emerged unscathed in this whole incident of the 12th of Tammuz. So he chose the Rebbetzin, his daughter. This class is about prayer. Talk to me, and it's for women. How appropriate on this day, the 12th of Tammuz, which is all a day about the festival of liberation, a day of celebration, the triumph of the Jewish spirit. And what did he sacrifice himself for, the previous Rebbe? This, to be able to pray and come to Shul and daven, and he takes his daughter, that's you. So it's all by divine providence we have our class, our final class on the subject today.